There's been news today that the veteran Labour politician, political activist Tony Benn has died. I just want to share some of my thoughts on Tony Benn and sort of thinking process about this individual and some wider issues actually. This isn't intended to be a sort of biographical video, so I'm not going to sort of make a biography of his life, and I don't intend it to be too overtly political either. I do think it's appropriate though to make a video about him. When Margaret Thatcher died, I made a video about that, and in many ways Tony Benn was, whereas Thatcher was an icon of the British right, arguably Tony Benn was the icon of the British left. There's been other figures like Michael Foot and recently Bob Crow and others who are all very important as well, but I don't think anyone is quite on the level of Tony Benn as an icon for the British left. So a very significant figure in this country. He was 88, which is a good age, roughly the same age actually as Margaret Thatcher. He had been hospitalised recently, so this wasn't a very surprising story, but still sad obviously for his family. I don't intend to make a video which is sort of sycophantic and oh, he was great, he was this, he was that. I didn't subscribe to all of his views, and it would be disingenuous to say that I did. Although I'd probably be more towards his politics than Thatcher's, but as a centrist I wouldn't fully endorse either as someone that I would particularly follow. But I genuinely think that Tony Benn was a man of conviction, and this isn't sort of post-mortem trying to say nice things. I really do think he was someone who stood by his conviction and had integrity. I mean, this was a man who had a movement named after him, the Bennites faction of the Labour Party, and I think it's fair to say that he is one of the most important figures ever in politics in this country not to have occupied any of the four great offices of state. His ministerial posts were never very high ranking. I'll just go through them. He was Postmaster General from 64 to 66 under Harold Wilson, Minister of Technology 66 to 70 under Harold Wilson, Chairman of the Labour Party 71 to 72 under Harold Wilson, Secretary of State for Industry 74 to 75 under Harold Wilson, and Secretary of State for Energy 75 to 79 under Harold Wilson and James Callaghan. But to see Tony Benn as just a figure of the 70s would be misleading. This was a man who was very active right into his 80s, and leaving aside all the political stuff, that in itself is to be admired, that someone could be so active at that age. It is inspiring actually. He was a president of Stop the War Coalition from 2003 till his death. That's why I said I don't endorse all his politics. Stop the War Coalition is a group I don't entirely endorse. In fact, I don't endorse. I do take a lot of issues with their position, but I wouldn't really have time to go into that in this video. I do believe there is a cause for intervention abroad in some circumstances, so in that area I would disagree with people like Tony Benn. His son was also in politics, both his sons actually. The better known son, Hilary Benn, served under Tony Blair, was much more of a centrist and lesser known than his father. But he comes from a political family. He was born into aristocracy, and this is an interesting thing about Mr. Benn. He was born into aristocracy. He actually, I'm reading from Wikipedia here, he campaigned to renounce his hereditary peerage, was instrumental in the creation of the Peerage Act 1963. So he resented the fact that he was born into aristocracy. I believe his title that he was born into was 2nd Viscount Stansgate. He was born in, I believe it was Stoke-on-Trent, but no, my mistake, Marylebone, London. But anyway, and he was a lifelong serving MP for the constituencies of Bristol South East. I shouldn't say lifelong serving. Bristol South East from 63 to 83, and Chesterfield from 84 to 2001. In the news reports tonight, they quoted him as saying, when he left the Commons, he done that to enter politics. Now, to me, that sums up the spirit of Anthony Wedgwood Benn. This was a man who had politics in his blood, and he was always a political animal, always a radical figure. In fact, Tony Blair, I believe, called him an icon of Britain's radical movement. I think it's there's some things to say about this. Just like the late Bob Crow, one of the things that's been commented on is that this was a man who, whilst very intelligent and very compassionate and had integrity, he was a politician and a political activist who resented the influence of the soundbite era, i.e. politics by soundbites, by loose jargon. You know, ironically, Tony Benn and Margaret Thatcher have one thing in common. They're both people that absolutely spoke their mind, and yet they're polar opposites in the political spectrum. But they are both people who were absolutely, whether you hate Thatcher or you hate Benn, they both spoke their mind. There is a perception nowadays that the three main leaders we have, David Cameron, Nick Clegg and Ed Miliband, are shallow. There may be some truth in that, but I think it's slightly unfair to entirely blame politicians for the perception that they're forced under. The reality is, if a new politician was to be as outspoken as Tony Benn, he or she probably wouldn't get into politics. So there is a reality here that is beyond politicians' control, and that is the power of the media. Now, Tony Benn was in politics at a time, the early 60s, when it was the final days, if you like, before media started really getting powerful. So I think it's slightly unfair to blame politicians for being supposedly shallow, because recently, for instance, there was controversy or debate about the public are turned off by hated PMQs. So the public need to make their mind up. What exactly do they want? Do they want politicians who are like Tony Benn, like Margaret Thatcher, who are belligerent and speak their mind, stand up for the views, but that might involve, for example, insults? Denis Healey was interviewed, the former Labour Chancellor, and he said we both insulted each other, that's the way it was. He didn't try to cry crocodiles here. By the way, Denis Healey within the Labour Party was an opponent of Tony Benn. But I think that this is more a fault of the media than of politicians, because, you know, we live in an age where if a politician does anything out of line, they're crucified by the media. It's true that people like Tony Blair and David Cameron and Nick Clegg are responsible for endorsing this sort of situation, by endorsing that sort of politics of image. I think it's very sad. But I also believe that if there was a new MP who was outspoken, it would be difficult for them to get the high office. And the problem with that is, if you don't get the high office, how much change can you really make? Now, Tony Benn was a man of conviction, but honestly, how much change did he actually make? For example, as president of the Stop the War Coalition, he didn't stop any wars. And that's not a slur on his character. I think he was a brave man in the sense that he did stand up for his conviction. But the point I'm making is, in politics, you can have influence outside cabinet level, of course you can. And there was an example recently in the phone hacking scandal. I forget the MP's name, which frustrates me because I have a lot of respect for him. But the MP who stood up to the Murdoch press, he was just a low-level MP, he wasn't a cabinet member. So you can have influence outside cabinet level. Nevertheless, legislation often comes from cabinet level. Whether you like it or not, power is what makes changes in society. That's just the way it is. Tony Benn did run for leadership of the Labour Party at times. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened had he been leader. Would history be different? I don't know. You know, at that time there was deep divisions within the Labour Party in the 70s, but compared to how far the Labour Party has come since then in terms of moving to the right under Blair and Brown, all the 70s figures seem to be lefties. I mean, Harold Wilson was far more to the left than Tony Blair, and yet Harold Wilson and Tony Benn hardly saw eye to eye. So it's interesting how much internal... I've always been interested in internal Labour Party politics. I'm not a member of the Labour Party. I haven't voted for the Labour Party yet. I probably will in 2015. But their internal politics has always interested me more than the Tories. I don't know why that is, but I'm fascinated by the Labour Party, even if I don't entirely support it. Anyway, I'm sort of going off on a tangent here. What I'm trying to get at is, I think there needs to be a radical change in this country in how politicians are expected to come across. It is partly, I fully agree that there is an inconsistency and a perceived lack of sincerity with the Free Party leaders. I think actually Ed Miliband, I respect the man. You know, he gets ridiculed ridiculously in the press, Millipede and He's Weak, etc., etc. So far, I've seen nothing that strongly indicates to me that Miliband is someone that's very disingenuous. I do believe he's a man of compassion. I do believe that. And just because he doesn't smoke a pipe, just because he doesn't quote Marx, etc., doesn't mean that he's not someone of compassion and integrity. Of course, time will tell. It is too early to tell when a leader's still in opposition. A Miliband premiership could bring unexpected things. We just don't know. But I think there needs to be a radical change in the media, because politicians in this country do not have absolute power. Actually, the most powerful entity, for want of a better word, in this country is the media, and they can make or break someone's career, and that is not the fault of politicians. It's really not, because any politician that does stand up to them is ridiculed. So Tony Benn, in a sense, was lucky to have been around at a time when it was only just starting to change, whereas new politicians, in a way, their job is a lot harder, because the media is a hell of a lot more powerful than it was in the past. Too powerful, in my opinion. So that's just some general thoughts on Tony Benn. He was an icon, and he will be sadly missed by a lot of people. I'm not going to say I was a supporter of his, it would just be a lie. There's certainly a lot of areas I probably would have agreed with him on, for example in terms of poverty, domestic poverty in this country. That's where I do tend to be pretty much to the left. However, in foreign policy I'd be much more to the centre, so that's where I would differentiate. So this was a man who his whole life stood by his conviction. Whether he was right or wrong depends on your outlook. If you're on the right, you're obviously not going to agree with him. On the left, you're going to think he's a saint. For centrists like me, I see that he is a very influential figure within Britain's left. And obviously my sympathies with his family. That's but you know, 88's a good age. That's a pretty long lifespan. Anyway, I'm just waffling on now. Respect to Tony Benn, even though I didn't agree with him on everything. He was an iconic figure. He will be missed by many. And that's it, really. Incidentally, I'm not going to take abusive comments on the thread. In fact, I might well just block comments for this video, because the problem with tribute videos is you get pigeonholed by both left and right. I think in this case I'm going to be attacked by the left for supposedly being anti-Ben or whatever. In fact, I'll leave comments open and I'll just say this: attack me if you want, but that only shows your intolerance to other views. I do respect Tony Benn's, sorry, I can't make that mistake, Tony Benn's role in the political left. He will always be a significant figure, always. And I think he was a fundamentally decent man. I do believe that. I just think he was wrong on some matters of foreign policy. But I'll leave it there. Okay, thank you for watching.